This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything, from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 245 of the GardenDC podcast. What if you could roll out a new meadow in one day? In this episode of GardenDC, we talk with Claire Chambers of Meadow Lab about a new technique for establishing meadows. The plant profile is on black cohosh, and we share what's going on in the garden as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with a last word on Decoding Tomato Leaf Aromas by Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Claire Chambers, founder at Meadow Lab. Welcome, Claire.
Thanks so much, Kathy. Really happy to be here.
Great to have you. And so before we dive into all things meadow growing and new possibilities for the future of landscape design, let's talk a little bit about Claire. And I'm going to roll it back all the way to baby Claire and ask if you were born with chlorophyll in your veins and a green thumb.
I love this question that you ask, and listening to the different responses you get from people on your show. I have to say no. The answer is no. But I was born in a family. I grew up in the mountains of Oregon, and I was born into a family with parents who really loved the outdoors. And my mother is an avid vegetable gardener. So I think I had an early appreciation of both beautiful landscapes in the wild and also the joy of cultivating plants. But I will say that my own journey really only started when I became a homeowner, which other people may sort of identify with, because as you live in a house and if you start to live there for many years, you start to see these plants kind of resurface every year, these perennials and these trees and these shrubs, and they sort of become old friends, and you start to slowly identify what they are and what they look like. So for me, that was the beginning of my passion for growing things.
So you said your mother had a passion for vegetable growing. Were there some in particular, and did you enjoy those vegetables as a child?
Oh, yes. I mean, one of my great childhood memories is, wandering barefoot through my mother's garden as she worked. She has, in Oregon, a small backyard garden, but very prolific. And my favorite things to munch were, snap peas. And those were probably the first ones. But, there were plum trees nearby and thickets of blackberries, which she turned into pies, and, a spicy arugula, which we ate every night. So she really kind of prided herself on keeping that garden going all year, and we all got the benefit of it.
Lucky in Oregon to have arugula year round.
Yeah, well, she babies it. She really babies it very well. Not for today's conversation, but she's kind of a genius at taking care of it well into the winter.
That's great. Yeah, because my arugula has bolted and already gone to seed, which the seeds are edible too, so that's always a good thing. But yeah, I would like to have some arugula little bit further into our summer heat if I could.
Yeah, that's true. Our heat is a different sort out here in the East.
Well, and so let's trace your career journey. So you didn't start off in the horticultural world. So what did you go to college for?
So I studied economics and studio art with a little bit of French mixed in there. My background, my parents are both professors of anthropology. And so when I went to school on the East Coast, I was really focused on, I think, going out in my own direction and business, and was sort of the furthest thing I could do in my family from what I came from. And so after I graduated college, I ended up going into consulting and spent about 6 years doing that. Business, just sort of general strategy consulting for a number of firms. And so that was sort of my first step into the corporate.
And then I know you're an entrepreneur and you founded a lingerie startup called, I think it's pronounced Journal.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. So, starting things is I think something that just brings me a lot of joy. So after consulting, I founded founded Journal and spent about a decade running that company. Really, it was both physical retail locations plus online. And I ended up selling that company in sort of the 2015. And then I went on to work at Walmart. So I kind of felt like I'd gone from this very small experience running, a chain of, 5 stores. So very, very small kind of in the scheme of retail. And I had an opportunity to join Walmart and run a pretty big business there in the furniture and home space. And it really felt like my chance to kind of go back to school, so to speak, and work with people who are really experts in their field. And so I did that for a number of years. And then I transitioned to another company in the home space that was really innovative when it came to this crossover between media and commerce. And I found that interesting. And then that's kind of the end of my business journey, because I had a little bit of in 2022, I decided to take a pause, and what I thought at first was going to be a few months turned into a few years. And I really kind of got swept into this world of horticulture. And that's eventually what led me to this new startup. So I am new to the space of horticulture. I bring a sort of student's curiosity and aptitude for learning to everything I'm doing right now, but bringing to bear on that my business experience to hopefully build Meadow Lab from the ground up.
Excellent. So I know you also did study at the New York Botanical Gardens School of Professional Horticulture. You received a certificate in landscape design. Can you describe that program a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to. That's a fantastic program that, I started by taking a class, I think it was on soil science. And this was, when I was taking my brief sabbatical and thinking about what I was going to do next, which I thought was going to be another role like my previous ones. And, sort of one thing led to another. And I started down this track of the landscape design courses thinking that, I would dabble in a few. And I really just loved it. I loved learning something new from the ground up. I'm really intrigued by landscape design because I think it really is such a challenge. When I really started to think about how designers build landscapes, it just struck me that there were so many interesting variables, the element of time, the element of height, the element of zones. So intellectually, it really was interesting to me. And so I got sort of swept along in this program, and I met many wonderful instructors and many wonderful colleagues who were in the program. And because it's an adult education course, there's people who are students at Baruch College, and then there's others who are people like me who are changing careers kind of mid-stride. And then there were many landscape designers who had already been doing the work, but maybe hadn't had the quote unquote credential. So it was a great program, and it, was 350 classroom hours and countless homework hours, but really gave me a nice jumping off point, skills ranging, like there were classes on art, history of landscape design. There was, hands-on drawing courses. There were courses in computer programs, and of course, plant courses, and the chance to spend a lot of time walking around NYBG, which is just a beautiful, beautiful garden and campus.
Sounds like a wonderful experience.
Yes, it was great.
And before we jump into all things Meadow Lab, let's talk a little bit about maybe your home garden. And are you based in New York City itself?
No, I live about an hour north of New York City in a town that's along the Hudson River called Garrison. And so it's sort of the lower Hudson Valley, I like to call it. Garrison itself is sort of it's just north of Westchester, but it has a very rural feel. We live on a dirt road, which is actually the old Albany Post Road. That was the mail route between Albany and New York City. And we bought the house in 2014, and it had some nice gardens to begin with that I have slowly as my own education has come along. And as I said before, as my familiarity with plants has changed, I've gotten more and more obsessed with shaping the gardens there. And one of the interesting parts about the garden that actually led me towards Meadow Lab is that we have we're lucky to have some really gorgeous, huge rock formations in our yard, which are of course natural. They're like several cars, car-sized rocks. And we live on a hillside, and that hillside is full of mugwort. It's and it's sort of the main focal point from the house. When you look out, you see these beautiful rocks, and then you see a hillside kind of going up to trees. And so the hillside had always been something that I had first neglected and, stressed about because it looked sort of untidy. And, I could tell that there were a lot of invasives in there. And then later tried to tame in some way or another, mostly unsuccessfully at first. And that was my first experience with meadow creation, or meadow failure as it was, and really led me down this journey of trying to figure out, how do you take a hillside that's kind of calling out for a meadow, and how do you make it happen? And so that was one of the sort of arcs that led me to where I am today.
Excellent. So let's talk about the concept behind Meadow Lab. And one of your premier products is a wildflower sod, which I find to be a fascinating concept. And can you fill in a little bit behind what is a wildflower sod?
Yeah, sure. So, most people are familiar with the concept of grass sod, and wildflower sod is really modeled on the idea of that. But of course, instead of using the cool season fescues that are used in most of those sod mixes in our area, we are engineering the sod to be full of perennials and full of native grasses. And the element of being able to take something that kind of resembles a carpet and put it down onto prepared soil and have it grow is very similar to sod. And so we can roll the sod before we deliver it, or we can slab it. But what you're getting when you order our product is our actual pieces of pre-grown plant material. And the difference, of course, is that many times when you order grass sod, it's the way it's grown and harvested is that it's cut out of the ground. And because of the density, the high seeding rate that sod growers use and the density of those roots, it sort of holds together. And the difference with native perennials here in the Northeast and probably all over the US is that they don't like their roots cut. They are great plants that we all count on to do, a lot of heavy lifting in the environment, but they are notoriously kind of finicky and delicate as they get going, and they compete less well, it turns out, than a lot of other plants, certainly some of the invasive plants we have in our area. And so the way that we grow our sod is to grow it on an impermeable layer, which is essentially just plastic sheeting, and the roots knit together and they form that sort of mat, which is useful for both transport and also for suppressing some of the weed growth when it's placed down into the environment.
And so are there custom wildflower sod mixes? How are you choosing what perennials and grasses to put into it?
Yeah, so this has been an ongoing process that we're working on to make sure that we get the mix really dialed in. So several years we worked with seed houses like Ernst and Prairie Moon to use some of their well-designed off-the-shelf mixes. Both companies and many others have some great mixes that they've really thought through and provide, great diversity and color throughout the season and all these things. For our commercial launch, we ended up signing on to do some work with Larry Weiner and his firm LWLA. And for those who aren't familiar with Larry and his firm, Larry's been working on meadows in the Northeast for decades and has really developed a name as sort of the leading expert in native meadows. And so he and his firm have been helping take the success that we've had in previous trials and then dial that in a little further to make sure that our seed mixes do a bunch of things. Obviously, we have a pretty short growing season in that we want to get from seed to a finished product in about 16 weeks. So we need a bulk of the species to be able to germinate readily, although there's many species in the mix that come in later years on purpose. But we also need the overall mix to work really well together. And so we want it to look legible. We want there not to be enough biodiversity to support a lot of different wildlife and pollinators, but we don't want it to look messy or sort of, ragtag. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of elements that we worked on with them to dial in. And of course, color is a big one of those things as well, making sure that you have things that bloom early in the season. And then you also have, late season asters and seed heads and winter interest and all of that. So it's been an ongoing process, and we have 2 seed mixes on the website right now. One is an all-native version developed with Larry and his team, and the second uses a similar native backbone of grasses and sedges and things like that, but and mostly native perennials, but it also throws in a few naturalized species like cornflower that add a little additional color in the beginning years of the meadow life cycle.
Interesting. Yeah, and Larry Weiner is based in Pennsylvania. You're in New York, so it sounds like this mix of natives is perfect for the East Coast and Mid-Atlantic gardener.
Yeah, we've really tried to make it workable in a broad area, but we also there are limitations, of course, by zone and also just what thrives in various areas. So one of the things we were considering when we were building this mix is this idea of generalist species, so species that are able to succeed in a range of site conditions. So the mix that we developed with Larry, and also the mix that includes some of the annuals, those mixes are really focused on things that will perform in a broad geographic area. We are sort of capped by how far we can deliver. We're still kind of fine tuning our delivery radius for this year, but it looks like it'll be about 250 miles from our growing site in New Jersey. So that'll get us down into your area, and it'll get us up into sort of the Boston, lower part of the Boston area. And these species that are in there thrive throughout that whole geographic range.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at your upland eastern native mix. And so most of the key species, zones 3 to 7, would be very familiar to most in the mid-Atlantic, going from butterfly weed to penstemon to Culver's root, stiff goldenrod, hairgrass. All of those I think would be familiar to most gardeners in our area.
Yeah, I think so. I think they are, and for good reason. They are, many of these species are just such great performers and tolerate a wide range of site conditions and competitive conditions and all of those things that are important to meadow success.
I think this is a really exciting concept. I definitely have a lot of questions about installation that I'm about to pepper you with. So if I wanted to establish a strip of this, say is going to be my hill strip or wherever on the property, how would I prepare the site that I wanted to put down the wildflower sod?
Yeah. Well, this is where I wish I had a magic wand and I could say nothing needed, but we all know, that the site preparation for meadows is one of the most important steps. And the other funny part about site preparation for meadows is there's no one answer on how to do it. And that's because every site is so different. And so we run a training for landscape professionals that we offer a few times a year. And we did the last one in March. And we spend a good several hours talking about all the different methods, all the different ways you can go about preparing the site. And it ranges from, solarization to smothering. You can use organic herbicides. You can do repeated till methods. There's really many, many ways that you can actually prepare a site. But the two most important outcomes that you're looking for is to sort of establish a smooth kind of smooth bed that's ready for something to be planted into it. Doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be, super. We don't actually recommend amending the soil at all. Whatever the soil is there, with very few exceptions, should be fine for wildflowers. You do want to have a sort of receptive space that you can put the sod on top of. So that's number one. And then the second one, which is probably more important, is that you're really paying attention to the removal of the weeds that are there. Because as I said before, weeds are very good competitors. They are aggressive and they outcompete wildflowers really readily. And so preparing the site with respect to removing the weeds is one of the things that I think gardeners, and specifically home gardeners, sometimes don't know about. And it's really, really important. So I've had really good success in my own backyard by doing solarization. It does take a while, maybe longer than you think, but it's kind of a hands-off method to, heat up the soil to an extent that the weeds die. Mm-hmm. Smothering also works. You can do it with cardboard. You can do it, and then you can even plant into that cardboard. So that's another approach. So it really, as I said, it depends a little bit on the site, because if you have a hillside of mugwort like I had, it's going to take a long time to kill that off, and it's not going to be a 2-month solarizing project. It's going to be maybe a full year solarizing project. Whereas if you have a nice, piece of lawn that you're ready to convert over into a meadow, then you might be able to use a sod cutter and cut that up really nicely and easily. And below that, you should have pretty clean, undisturbed soil that you can seed or lay sod over.
Yeah. And I think in my own book, Groundcover Revolution, talked about many similar techniques. Of course, sod cutting, great if you can, as you said.
It's backbreaking.
Yes.
But if you can do it.
If you can do it with a machine or a roller, even better. But going from straight turf to this method almost sounds ideal. But I'm thinking about establishment of different ground covers and the future of wildflower sod to have like different ground covers in a sod that you could just roll out.
Yes.
That I was like, ooh, this is opening up a whole new horizon for ground covers too.
Yes, and I'm so excited about that, I have to say, because some of the most challenging parts of my yard are actually areas where, I think your book and your thoughts about ground covers are so important. Those are the spaces, some of the shadier spaces, for example, or the spaces on the side of the woodland edge of our garden. Those are sometimes the most frustrating for us homeowners and gardeners because it's hard to get things to grow there. And so we are doing a lot of R&D right now. In addition to these seed mixes we already have, which are real meadows, 3 to 4 foot meadows. We are also working on other ground covers and low lawn alternatives and things like that. So I hope the method will be conducive to a lot of different type of plants, but we do have a ways to go in getting there, probably a few years of R&D at least.
Yeah, I think it's exciting potential going from, say, a bee lawn, a low growing lawn, not quite a meadow, where it's different mixes of clovers and, tiny little bee type plants, up to like having rolling out a carpet of ferns. Like if you could get a carpet of ferns established that quickly in a sod and being able to put them, as you say, in a shady spot or shady damp spot, that would be the dream.
Yes. And I knew there are actually a few companies up further north than us that are doing these hay scented fern sods, and I think are actually digging them out of the natural environment. And so, you have to be careful, I think, not to erode environments too much. But those some of the installations I've seen people use those on are just really beautiful. A sea of hay scented ferns, on an entry walk is just stunning. So we are definitely playing with those ideas and other lower growing ground covers. And also, as you mentioned, the lawn alternatives. Not everybody wants to get rid of their violets in their lawn. Some people really love that. And so thinking about how can we create various alternatives to lawn that are really biodiverse, beautiful throughout the seasons, and still maybe accessible in whatever way you as a homeowner need them to be.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of the lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
Can see definitely for the bee lawn alternative to turf grass, this would be a real success story. And I was thinking also of my friend Moss and Annie in North Carolina, a friend of the podcast, who does moss lawns, and she does moss rescues, and that's basically rolling up sheets of moss and then establishing them at a new location.
Yeah.
So similar to that, I guess my next question on site preparation is the ideal if it's flat, but what if it's not? What if it's a kind of a steep hillside? How would you adhere the wildflower sod to that?
Yeah, well, this is where so all my years of testing sod, I've actually put it into my problem meadow in the backyard. So I now have a beautiful hillside of wildflowers. And so sod works really well for hillsides, with a few little caveats. But the first is that planting seed or planting plugs on a hillside is really tough. And so the idea of being able to lay out bigger strips of pre-grown plants is it makes installation really fast, and it really allows you to kind of access hillsides in a way that maybe would just, take a while for that seed to really settle into a hillside, and it often washes down and there's a lot of problems. So sod is very well suited. There, sometimes you need a little helping hand with gravity. And so we use biodegradable wooden pegs, and we basically kind of peg it in to start, and that keeps the sod sort of in the right places. And of course, nature helps with that immediately, because as soon as the sod goes down onto the ground, the roots are already working hard. And within days, you see little hair roots coming down. And then within weeks, you really see the sod start to knit into the earth. So you don't need the biodegradable pegs for long. And that's why we use biodegradable ones, because they kind of just disappear into the earth. But it does allow you to make sure that the sod stays where it wants to at the beginning. And then the other side of that is watering in. And so one of the things we say to people who are interested in sod for hillsides is that we can definitely put it on a hillside, but what you need to be able to do to maintain it is a different story. So sod does need to be, like any new plant, it needs to be watered in so that the roots are encouraged to go down into the earth. And so sometimes watering on a hillside can be tough, because the water has a tendency to go down faster than down the hill faster than it goes down into the earth. So you need to make sure that you spend a little more time watering it in. And then secondly, you need to be able to maintain it. Meadows, I always make this joke that I find funny, which is that, meadows want to become forests when they grow up in this area. And so if you don't cut back a meadow sort of at least once a year, you do start to see encroachment of, little trees and shrubs and woody materials that won't necessarily help your perennial plants thrive. And cutting something back, whether it's weed whacking or using a mower, can be more difficult on a hillside. So you do need to be able to access it in that way if you want to stop that sort of evolutionary process.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, was about weeding and maintenance. But I'm glad to hear about the biodegradable wood sticks or pegs, because I was picturing landscape staples, or using the croquet hooks.
Yeah. I actually did use those my first year because I didn't have the wooden ones, and I'm still finding them in the lawn, which is in the meadow, which is not my favorite things, and they get rusty, and don't recommend.
No, but that's a great ingenious solution. So again, circling back to the maintenance and weeding, I think it's a yearly, I'm going to guess, mow that you're doing.
Yeah, we recommend at least a yearly mow. Many meadows are fine with just that one-time mow. And we say to do it, late winter is a great time to do it. Some people can't access their meadows in certain situations, maybe if they live in an area that has late snows. It can be sometimes hard to get in there at that right time. The key point is to cut it back before the new growth starts to germinate. And that really helps increase the biodiversity of the meadow, because if you have little seedlings down there that are not getting sort of light and air, then they tend to not compete as well. So that we recommend cutting it back in the winter. You can also cut it back in the late fall if you're not a fan of the sort of the seed head look, or you have neighbors that are a little dubious about your meadow. But the best for wildlife is to leave it as long as you can into the winter, and then cut it right back before it starts to wake up in the spring. So we recommend that. There are other cuts, and this is something our team is really able to help with, because we have spent a long time. I have colleagues in the UK who work with our sister company over there, and they have been working on a lot of R&D around the right mowing regimes and various times to mow. But one tool we know we have as gardeners, of course, is cutting things back before they go to seed often helps reduce a proliferation of that species. And so one thing we say to people is you can fine tune the diversity of your meadow by paying attention to things like what's thriving. So if you happen to see one species that looks really dominant and is sort of getting more dominant than you'd like it to be, and you think it's crowding out other things, then doing a sort of Chelsea chop at a certain time in the year right before that goes to seed and clearing it away is an effective way to just naturally decrease the prevalence of that species. So there are fine tune ways that we can play with maintenance and cutting regimes that do affect kind of the overall look of the meadow.
And we were talking about earlier that the establishment on a hillside is easier to do with this new sod technique versus plugs or seeds. How, in other aspects, is the sod superior to doing a seeding or plugs?
Well, I have to say first, seeding and plugs are two great ways to establish meadows. So I never want to throw either one under the bus. And, especially with larger sites, seeding is the most and, the best way to really establish a meadow. Mm-hmm. But what I will say about wildflower sod is that we're sort of accelerating the life cycle of a meadow. So one of the things that people who have seeded meadows have probably come across is that, first of all, it takes a while for things to germinate. And then secondly, when you have open ground and you have sunlight hitting it and you have wonderful winter rains and snows, no matter what you've done on site prep, you're going to have weeds pop in or blow in or whatever it is. And so when people seed a meadow, we recommend this, and many other people who are in the meadow space recommend that you mow it for the first year every 6 to 8 weeks. And so for many homeowners, this is really frustrating because you want to establish a meadow, and what you have is sort of a scruffy, patchy looking thing of plants that you're mowing back, more than you could have imagined. Sod does not have that requirement, because what we're doing is we're sort of growing it in a very controlled environment. We use a substrate, and not a soilless substrate. It has a lot of compost in it, and it really encourages things to germinate rapidly. We're nurturing these little seedlings. We're watering them. They're growing to be quite robust while we have them in our possession. And then when we put them down, as I said before, the root mat really helps suppress other weed seed that might be buried in the ground. And so you can really focus on the beneficial species that are there and letting them grow and flower. And so where you might not see anything in your seeded meadow for the first year because you're not letting it bloom, in a first year sod meadow, you get, the kind of pioneer species that are the early movers, the things that establish the fastest. And so that can be really great for people who are impatient, or, if you're a landscape designer, you're working with clients who want to see a meadow in their first year, they're going to see a meadow in their first year. So it's great in that way. And then it, just like any seeded meadow, it will continue to evolve. The species, some of the fast moving pioneer species will taper out in later years. And then you'll start to see some of the species that take a little longer to develop coming in. And that's part of the joy, I think, of any meadow installation.
I think there's a lot to be said about instant gratification. And having that first year looking great, because again, circling back to ground covers, it can be a couple years. It might be your third year or your fifth year where it looks really good, but those transition years can be a little tough. Especially your neighbors are like, "Oh, what are you doing?" So,
yes, right.
And I can also see great applications for this for temporary. So I could see a temporary green roof, or it's a construction site, but it looks like, a horrible mud hole right now. And it's just a holding space until that goes in 2 years later. So if we could establish a wildflower sod almost immediately and hold that ground and that soil in from erosion, that's wonderful right there.
Yes, that's right. Plants do such a great job with erosion, right? And being able to set a whole bunch, we have dozens of plants per square foot in our sod. So being able to set them kind of down and have them do their work, holding back the weeds and also holding back the soil from floating away. That's a really nice outcome for everyone.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I was thinking about was, the tragedy in North Carolina with all those hillsides being wiped away and those torrential rains and flooding, that this type of restoration could be really widespread and used almost immediately to get, again, that erosion under control of losing more soil, but also from the impact happening in future years. Like if you could get this down now.
Yeah. And that's an area of sort of like a future area of growth I'd really like us to push into, is kind of restoration and conservation. We are working with Pinelands Nursery in southern New Jersey to grow this product. And they are, if you know them, they've been in this business for 2 generations, and we're really an early pioneer in restoration species, the growing of some sort of these restoration species in the Pine Barrens, New Jersey. And so I'm really hoping that we can kind of put our heads together on some of these maybe restoration seed mixes that focus on, some of the spaces that have been degenerated and need some of that. And maybe that's less of a showy mix, right? But it has a real ecological problem to solve that it is, focused on.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't have to look pretty along roadsides or anywhere else. It's nice if it does, but if it's really just for restoration and erosion control, that would just be great.
That's right. Yeah.
And I thought of another benefit of the wildflower sod when you were talking about not disturbing the weed seed bank underneath, because when you do plugs or any type of seeding, or if you're tilling at all or doing that type of prep, you're always churning up more weed seeds.
Yeah, that's right. And, you asked a question about weeding, which I think I didn't answer directly back then. People do ask us, how should I weed? Should I saw a weed in here, should I rip it out? And we say, no, don't. Cut it. You can cut it at the base. And, if you see it, cut it repeatedly. But don't, do not pull it out, because that's exactly right. You're basically saying to whatever is around it, here you've been disturbed, and disturbance is what gives new plants the resources to kind of come into the world. That's why sod cutting, and especially people who are looking at their turf lawn and thinking, oh, I can do something more here, I can do something better for the world. It's a really great way to convert. And luckily there's lots of, as we talked about, there's lots of ways you can convert a lawn. Sod cutting is so simple, and does offer a really nice canvas where you haven't gone into the earth. And so then whatever you put on top of it, whether that is, we have a wildflower soil product that does something similar to the sod, but definitely the sod, both of those products, fit right in on top of that undisturbed soil, and will really give you the best chance of a long-term, 20-year meadow that hopefully has very few encroachments.
Yeah, I would say yanking the weed out from the middle is not your best choice, and cutting it off again and again and again does get tedious, but it is the better method.
Yes, that's right. It does get tedious.
So you were talking about the 20-year meadow. Looking ahead after your first year of getting your wildflower sod established, what do you think the peak years are? 3 years out, 5, 7?
Yeah, I think the sweet spot where you start to see some of these slower to establish species is probably year 4 and year 5. You do see, we do have Rudbeckia in there, which is one of those species that, really puts on a show in years 1 through year 3. And then, we've played with the amount of it we put in there, which is probably a lot less than other seed mixes, because we want that visual presence. It's very cheerful. It's, it's a beautiful flower, and it does a lot of hard work in, defining the meadow and holding back other things in those early years. But eventually you do want that to kind of give way to some of the species that come in later. And so I've been really enjoying watching my hillside meadow evolve. There are species like some asters we see straight away, and then there's other species that come later. And so it's a great thing. And then, the funny part about it, of course, is that not all, even though you might have the same species mix, it's going to react very differently in different sites, right? And so when people ask us, what will I see in year 5? We really can't answer that question. We can tell you what we might have seen in some sites, but it really depends on the soil type and the sort of microclimate you're in, and the shade that big pine tree is casting, or things like that. So very individual process.
And so most of the research you're doing here in the growing, you said it was in New Jersey, correct?
Well, 2 places. So we're doing a commercial growing in New Jersey, and that's in the sort of southern New Jersey area. In my neck of the woods, we have a trial site in Cold Spring, New York, which is just north of me. And that's where we've been growing our trial sod for the last few years. And we're doing some of our new seed mix R&D. So this year we're, for example, working with Todd Bittner at Cornell Botanical Garden, and we're testing out growing one of their low grow no-mow grass mixes in our format. So we're doing tests like that. We're testing some other ground covers like you and I talked about. And so we're kind of testing in both places, but doing our commercial production, which is about 190,000 square feet of product this year in Columbus, New Jersey.
Well, I'm excited that it's happening in the Mid-Atlantic. Are there other companies worldwide or counterparts that you have in Europe or elsewhere doing the same thing, but for local native mixes there?
Yes, we are a partner with a company in England called Wildflower Turf. They were a family-run company that has been operating for 2 decades, and they have they're actually a small minority owner of Meadow Lab. So and really just great advisors and team members, and so we've been learning a lot from them about their growing systems. Obviously, the species mix they use in England and ours are wildly different, and that's on purpose. Different environments, but we can learn a lot from each other about the way we grow these things. So they have been wonderful partners, and they are helping us with research, and we're helping them with research. So they are part of the operation and super useful. And then, as I said, we're also working with other experts in the area. So Larry Weiner and his team. Another advisor of the company is Elliot Wadsworth at White Flower Farm in Connecticut. And he has been part of the company from its inception. And we did some trials up there in Connecticut. There's actually a test meadow that you can see right by the farm store at White Flower Farm for anybody who's in the Connecticut area. So yeah, lots of experts involved in this journey, especially given, my recent transition into the space.
Yeah, and I'm actually thinking about some of my urban gardening fellow gardeners and how small of space some of us have, a little townhouse, tiny 10 by 10 postage stamp front yard, or maybe we just have a couple containers. I think you could just take basically a cutout right, of the wildflower sod and stick it on a container.
Yeah, I mean, we would love to be able to sell this, more to the, get it into the hands of garden centers and homeowners and things like that. And one of the things that I didn't touch on, but I think is important, is that the shelf life of grass sod is probably a lot more robust than wildflower sod. And so one of the challenges that we've known about for a long time with wildflower sod, and it's kind of like one of these funny, hard things that we're going to have to get really good at, is logistics, right? Because wildflower sod has to be sort of harvested and installed in a sort of 48-hour time frame. It's not going to sit on a pallet for days at Home Depot. And so, big focus of the company is getting it into the hands of installers really quickly as soon as we harvest it from our fields.
Yeah, and unlike mosses, which can revive very quickly once they're hydrated, this is going to be tough if it ever totally dries out.
Yes. That's right. Because we are growing it in such a thin layer, so it's nice and light, it needs to be kept moist during its transit. And of course, if you stack a moist product on a pallet and then set that in the sun in the Northeast, that's not a great combination.
Yes. I'm just happy that I'm not personally having to deal with a living product. I can imagine some of those logistical challenges. So any future research you can divulge or talk about, or direction for the company or for wildflower sod in particular?
Well, I think I've touched on a few things that we're working on, and the thing about R&D in this space is it takes a long time, right? You can grow something one year, but then we want, we really want this product to be high quality in year 5, and so it takes a few years for us to really see how it evolves, right? One thing that I am excited about for landscape designers and homeowners is a product we're developing, which we're calling Grass Canvas, and it's basically a backbone of native grass species and calyxes, and basically a multi-dimensional layer of grasses that have a sort of fine aesthetic, and that we're thinking that people might want to plant plugs into. So the idea is sort of, you have the backbone of the meadow, which is beautiful native grasses, and then many designers we talk to have a plant palette that they really want to use, or their client really wants to see. And so being able to plant drifts of perennials into, a beautiful but very functional native grass sort of canvas is something that we are really excited about for the design industry part of the landscaping world.
Yeah, I can really see a lot of applications for that, and that would be exciting from the designer side of things.
Yeah. Not, because the off-the-shelf mixes and our mixes that are very highly engineered are great, but at the end of the day, they're sort of generalist mixes. And so when you want to get into something that's more stylized or designy, it's nice to be able to pick those species by hand, or even to decide, I want a mostly grass meadow with a few forbs in it, versus I want something that's really quite floral.
Yeah. I cannot wait to see how this develops and grows into the future, pun intended. And so, Claire.
So many puns.
Yes. So how can our listeners contact you to find out more, Claire?
So we're online at meadowlab.com is our website address, and you can see more information about our seed mixes. You can send a request for a quote there, and contact our team. If you want to get in touch via email, we're at sales@meadowlab.com. And then we're also on Instagram at meadow_lab. And so those are the places to find us.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Claire, for sharing this exciting development in Meadow. I'm going to call it technology. Is there a better term for that, do you think?
I love that. I've always wanted to run a tech company. No, just kidding. I haven't. But I love that. We are trying to be the high-tech version of the Meadow space. And so I love that. Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to talk to you. And I love talking to somebody who's a ground cover aficionado and lover.
Great having you on, Claire.
Thank you.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Black cohosh plant profile. Black cohosh, Actea racemosa, formerly Semicifuga racemosa, is a perennial plant with a base of dark green foliage that sends up tall white blooms in the early summer. It can grow from 3 to 8 feet tall and about 3 feet wide. It's also known as bugbane, fairy candle, and black snakeroot. It's a member of the buttercup family. It's native to the eastern half of the United States, where it grows naturally in moist, deciduous woodlands. It's hardy to USDA zones 3 to 8. Black cohosh prefers to grow in full to part shade in rich soils, yet is fairly drought tolerant once established. Black cohosh is a good choice for filling in the spaces when spring ephemerals have gone dormant. Native Americans used black cohosh for a variety of medicinal purposes, and it's used today in menopause treatments. Pollinators love it. It's also the larval host for the Appalachian azure butterfly. It is deer and rabbit resistant. Black cohosh can be started easily from seed. The seeds should be collected in the fall and planted immediately. It'll take a few years for the plants to flower. You can also divide the plants in the early spring or late fall. Black cohosh, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, I've been enjoying the blooms and the pollinators who are visiting my milkweeds, marigolds, and zinnias. Over at the community garden plot, the cowpea seedlings are up. In garden tips that we shared this week on our social media, we advise that opossums or possums are a great gardener's best friend. They eat thousands of ticks each season, as well as grubs and slugs. In upcoming local gardening events, if you're in the Washington, D.C. area, you might like to attend Starting Seedlings drop-in sessions at the Well of Oxen Run. The session coming up is on July 9th from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Join DC Greens at the well at Oxen Run for a hands-on seedling starting activity, perfect for all ages. It's free and open to adults and children. Attendees 17 or younger must be accompanied by an adult. Pre-register at dcgreens.org. Coming up this fall, I'm giving a talk on seed saving, harvesting and storing your garden's bounty at Brookside Gardens. This is on Saturday, October 11th from 10:30 a.m. to noon, and it is in person at Brookside Gardens in Wheaton, Maryland. The fee is $25 to attend. Discover the art of seed saving in this hands-on class. Registration will be going up soon in a few weeks, and you can register through Active Montgomery website. And then save the date of December 3rd for the 11th annual Turning a New Leaf conference put on by the Chesapeake Conservation Landscaping Council. This will be held at Dewey Gottwald Center in Richmond, Virginia. This multi-state conference brings together local businesses, contractors, educators, and conservation professionals to advance sustainable landscaping and environmental practices across the Chesapeake Bay region and beyond. Happy gardening!
This is Christy Page with Food Gardening Network with the last word on Decoding Tomato Leaf Aromas to Detect Disease Before Visible Symptoms by Amanda MacArthur. Let's be honest, we've all been there. One day your tomato plants are the picture of health, and the next they're doing a convincing impression of plant zombies with mysterious spots, curling leaves, and a generally distressing appearance that sends you panic Googling tomato apocalypse causes at midnight. But what if I told you your nose could have warned you weeks before your eyes caught on? That distinctive tomato smell isn't just there to make your garden smell amazing. It's actually a sophisticated plant communication system that you can learn to decode. Now, are you ready to develop your tomato whispering skills? Here's your guide to common tomato aromas and what they're secretly telling you. First, you need to know what healthy tomatoes smell like. Go out on a warm morning when the dew has dried out, but before the day gets hot. Gently brush your fingers against the leaves, don't crush them, and smell. Healthy tomato plants have a clean, green, slightly spicy aroma. Pleasantly pungent without being acrid, and it's a crisp scent that doesn't linger too long on your fingers. This is your baseline. This is the all systems are normal tomato scent. Now here are some early disease warning signs. The too sweet signal. If your tomatoes suddenly smell sweeter, almost fruity when you touch the leaves, pay attention. This is often the first sign of early blight, appearing a full 7 to 10 days before any visible leaf spots. For your action plan, at the first whiff of unusual sweetness, start a preventative fungicide program and improve air circulation immediately. Remove lower leaves that touch the soil and add mulch to prevent soil splash onto leaves. Next, the fermented warning. A slightly fermented yeasty smell like bread dough rising often precedes bacterial leaf spot by up to 2 weeks. The sour overtone happens because the bacteria are already multiplying on the leaf surface but haven't yet caused enough damage to show visible symptoms. Your action plan: remove and destroy the affected leaves, not in your compost, improve drainage, and switch to drip irrigation if possible. Next is the harsh chemical alert. If your tomato leaves develop a sharp, almost chemical smell, somewhat like cleaning products or plastic, you may be catching early signs of spider mite infestation before webs appear. Your action plan: immediately blast plants with a strong stream of water focusing on the leaf undersides. Repeat every 3 days for 2 weeks, and introduce predatory mites if available. Next, the musty basement indicator. A musty, damp cardboard smell is your early warning sign for fungal diseases like late blight. This scent can appear 5 to 12 days before visible symptoms. Action plan: improve air circulation immediately, apply approved fungicide, and be ruthless with removing any suspicious leaves. Now, like fine wine tasting, tomato scent detection is a skill you can develop with practice. Create a scent memory bank. Every morning, smell your healthy plants and mentally note the aroma. Use comparison sniffing. Smell multiple plants in succession to notice subtle differences. Try the jar test. Put a few leaves in a jar, cap it, and let it sit in the sun for 30 minutes. Open and smell. This concentrates the aromas and makes differences more obvious. Keep a scent journal. Note changes alongside weather conditions and plant development stages. And the finger roll technique. Gently roll a leaf between your fingers for 3 seconds. Don't crush it, then smell. This releases more compounds without damaging the plant. This has been The Last Word by Christy Page at Food Gardening.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. By the way, you can become a listener, supporter, or subscriber by going to creators.spotify.com/pod/show/GardenDC/subscribe. That link is also in our show notes. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, and Pinterest at WDC Gardener, also on Blue Sky and many other platforms. On Facebook, you can find us at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast listening app or a thumbs up on YouTube. Please take a moment to share us on your social media with #GardenDC so other gardeners can find us too.